Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the using a GM Oracle as part of your sort of D&D, Dungeon Master, Game Master sort of tool set. Take a little bit of the burden off your shoulders, especially on those things that sort of kind of jump out at you and you feel like you have to exert a lot of energy trying to figure out things sort of on the fly. And I think that's because of the nature of how the tool is built. I think really helps to kind of share that burden and kind of shoulder it and kind of take it a little bit off of what the load of what you have to do sort of behind the screen as a Dungeon Master or Game Master. So what happens sort of like in a D&D session when a player asks a question you're not prepared for? When you don't know sort of like what to do and you kind of freeze, they ask you a question and you go, I don't... Internally you're just like, I don't know. I don't know. And you're like, I don't even know how to think about answering that will make sense. When you start thinking about, like, especially if you're the sort of Dungeon Master or Game Master that has like a lot of sort of world building in the back, or this is a question that probably the player doesn't know when they're asking, but they're like, this could actually have a pretty significant effect of sort of how the game goes or how the campaign goes, or define something very specific about this adventure or this part of the world or whatever it might be. And you're like, I don't know, and now I've got a lot of pressure on me to either to make some sort of decision one way or the other. And so, right, you just kind of start to freeze. You have like all the eyes on the table on you. And so I found that using something like a GM Oracle, which is built for sort of solo TTRPG play, to be sort of a helpful sort of safety net in these circumstances. It's sort of something that allows me to go, because it's particularly built for basically this specific scenario where you as a player are sort of playing by yourself. So I guess that kind of broaches right into the topic. You know, what is, for those who don't know, what is a GM Oracle? So it's a tool for solo tabletop role-playing games that sort of acts as a stand-in for that missing power-hungry fiend behind a DM screen, right? Those sorts of us that are like, all the control and all my little pieces and all my little toys to play with. So GM Oracle kind of helps by confirming, you know, what's happening by the solo player sort of prompting it. You kind of prompt it with yes or no questions. So an example of that would be like, okay, I've walked into this room. Are there any crates my PC can hide behind in this room? That's a yes or no question. You roll the Oracle die. It's going to tell you yes or no. Then you'll be like, okay, so there are crates, and they're specifically large enough for me to hide behind. Good to know. And so it can kind of, through some yes and no questions, it kind of helps you build out the world and give you what is and is not kind of around and those sorts of things. It also helps you to sort of create and connect sort of locations, creatures, items, and plots. Kind of help you come up with ways to sort of connect what can feel like very disparate elements and kind of build it into sort of a knit of a whole adventure that, with you also kind of being flexible to fill in some of the blanks yourself, create the adventure as you're playing the adventure, which is a very interesting way to do. That's obviously one of its big strengths. So if you have watched my D&D solo RPG, you can see the GM Oracle in action, but also you can kind of see how it does. We run into new NPCs and new locations and stumble into new adventure threads, and then we close off adventure plots as we can connect them. That's sort of tied to our level up because we're using sort of a storytelling milestone leveling up. The third thing it does is that it helps you sort of like prompt ideas to provide context for sort of what's happening. The manifesto you find in the study is on the subject of, and then you would roll on the random table with descriptors and verbs and nouns and things like that. So this is what we've been using in the dungeon in my own solo playthrough. And these are the Chalcedion's solo dark prompts. Like I was saying, you find this book in the study and on the subject of defend and isolation. You go, okay, you kind of use your brain. You're like, all right, what does that mean in the context of sort of the adventure that I think is likely? So it's sort of like this incredibly useful aid for solo TTRPG players. So it does sort of those three things. It kind of helps you answer the yes or no things to kind of confirm things, helps you sort of create and connect locations, creatures, and items, and plots, and all that stuff together. So everything you come across kind of knits together. And then it gives you These sort of like prompt ideas when you kind of hit a roadblock. These are the sort of things that kind of come up as your dungeon master pretty often, right? You're gonna have to give a lot of yes or no answers. Your players are trying to find connections between things which may or may not be related, or things you hadn't assumed were related. It can help you there, or gives you the ideas to sort of like prompt context when the players are way off the rails and they're just kind of coming up with stuff. Or like I said, their player character pulls a random book off a shelf and says, "What is this book about?" You can roll on sort of those prompts and be like, "Oh, defend isolation." Is sort of the sort of weird isolationist manifesto that you found on the shelf. Boom. And then that kind of gives us some context. Also for the person who might have that on their bookshelf, if you need that too. So that kind of gives you this extra little smidge of character detail you can kind of like work into it. But you might be thinking sort of like, hey, well, I'm the DM. Why would I want to incorporate a tool that does what I do? Is the AI revolution coming for my DM screen? Yeah, I mean, if they can figure out, trust me, if Wizards of the Coast can figure out a way to mint dungeon masters in a digital form that you pay as a monthly subscription for, if they're not working on that already, they're definitely thinking about it. They would love to figure out how to make that work, because that would make selling D&D to everybody in the world a lot easier if you don't need 1 out of 3, 4, or 5 friends to be the person who sits behind the screen and everybody gets to play a character. For a lot of groups, that would be probably a boon. They would actually probably really like that. But this sort of GM Oracle tool is, first of all, not really an AI. I mean, the best that I've seen is that people put together sort of like automatic roll tables online for it with a little bit of coding. But it's still very much sort of up to you to integrate those details. The important thing is that sort of like prep and improv are really difficult for dungeon masters, for every dungeon master to some varying degrees. This tool is very versatile because it'll let you sort of interact with both of those things. It's sort of like a sort of dungeon master personal assistant in that way. It's going to help wherever you need it, and only when you pull it out and use it. So if you don't need it or you don't like what it gives you, you just ignore the results of it and come up with something better, or roll again. It isn't really that much different than sort of any other sort of random table you might roll on that might be already part of your sort of Dungeon Master or Game Master tool set. If you already use random tables for sort of like your prep and for sort of improving as you play, adding a GM Oracle to that is only going to help you, and it's going to be really familiar once you get sort of like into the zone of being alright, they've asked me a question I don't know, here's the table I might roll on for that. Roll those dice, I like this result, I don't like that result, I'm going to do something else instead. Very simple once you sort of get into the flow. Let me give you sort of like an example. I feel like it's sort of every time that I'm prepping, there's always some sort of like unexpected question that comes up for me. It's often me sort of like going through a dungeon, and I've done about half of it, and then realize I haven't considered something, and I'm not sure what that means for my prep. This was sort of like a little blind spot that I didn't think about. I'm like, all right, what does that mean? Grab the dice, grab the oracle, and be like, okay, yes or no, what does this mean? How can I change that? Will this affect other parts of my dungeon? Yes or no? What does that mean? Some ideation, give me some prompts for how that changes this room. Okay, it does this and this instead. So I found that super useful, because instead of me trying to sit down and trying to unravel sort of like a half-made jigsaw puzzle in my prep, I can just start asking questions, which allows me to sort of get moving quickly on making those adjustments and kind of get me back into finishing off the prep that I need to do. And at the table, I don't know about you guys, but certainly as a dungeon master, players ask me off-the-wall questions about the world and the adventure I certainly don't have a prepped answer for. I mean, I feel like I do that as a player to DMs all the time. Even this comes down to the very simple question of, hey, what's your name? I'm asking an NPC a name, and you're like, I didn't give the shopkeeper a name. Why are you asking me the shopkeeper's name? Are you going to come back and ask him? Are you going to make this a recurring NPC? The shopkeeper who sells, like, rope and stuff? You're going to come back. You're going to come talk to this guy again. You want to have long, exploratory character backstory conversations with the shopkeeper. No, no, you don't. But it is one of those things, sometimes you get asked something off the wall. But it is the sort of thing that you would keep a names table for, so why don't you keep a GM Oracle that allow you to better address some of those sort of questions that don't need a specific this answer kind of thing. I stopped sort of like worrying about it and sort of trust in the random factor. And I'm just gonna let the dice take the wheel and kind of decide for me, even sometimes when I do have a strong like inclination. It's like, ooh, I do want this to happen, but that's great with the GM Oracle, because it's like, I don't want to just necessarily make that by DM Fiat. So I might use the GM Oracle style thing where I roll the d20 and I add a modifier to it, and that's going to tell me yes or no. It's like, is this a thing? This is the thing that I think will happen, and I think that's likely to happen. Let me roll a die to confirm that, rather than me just manifesting that. It's a little bit of a difference. Sometimes that's a sort of a very grayish, blurry line, I feel like, when it comes to as DM being like, oh, well, they've done something, so I'm going to completely change the adventure. So you might ask, has my PC encountered the lizard folk before? Do I know anything about them? If you ask me that as DM, and unless I have a very good idea of who your character is and where they're from, I'm going to be like, I don't know, let's roll for it. Let's see if you do or not. Well, you grew up in a marshy area, so, it's actually probably somewhat likely you've encountered lizard folk. I'll give you a +3 to the roll. And then we'll just roll basic. Times we call it like a luck roll sometimes as a DM. There's different things you can see with sort of, you're a big celebrity, Dungeon Masters, like Mercer, Perkins, Brendan Lee Mulligan. You can see all of them use, and many others, use like a luck roll or something like that, where somebody asks them a question, they just pick up a d20 and roll it. That is exactly what they're doing, right? They're doing that luck roll. Or some other, maybe more noodly type of oracle roll, but it's probably just a luck roll. It's like, if you roll 11 or better, the answer is yes. Because you've asked me something I have no idea what the answer is, and I don't really want to waste a lot of brain power thinking about that, so, because I don't think it's going to be particularly important, so we're just going to roll for it and see what it does. So that is sort of the power of a GM Oracle as a tool for us as Dungeon Masters, is it sort of reduces the pressure on your brain for being the only resource for coming up with ideas. So it kind of gives us a lot of things. It feels, like I said, it feels the same role as what a dozen different random tables. One is it kind of gives you this more focused way to sort of encourage improvisation to answer questions for you, whether that's while you're prepping by yourself or at the table playing with people. One of the probably the biggest strengths that I've found of sort of a GM Oracle is that it's not my brain. So our brains kind of only have so many ideas, and it doesn't take too long, especially as Dungeon Master or Game Master, before you start to kind of use the same ideas over and over again. It's one of the reasons I kind of like the Oracle for prepping. So it can be difficult to kind of see that as a Dungeon Master, but if you've been a player for a while with the same Dungeon Master, you'll notice a DM tends to run very similar scenarios to ones you've played previously, or they have the same. Every DM has their certain style of play, but even the premises of those adventures can start to be the same. I found it helpful to use a GM Oracle specifically because it kind of pushes me out of that sort of rut where I'm kind of doing the same things over and over again. It's like, okay, this is another adventure where they go into a cave and find a thing and bring it back. I've run that adventure I don't know how many times, so let's roll some dice and maybe see if there's something different about the situation, or the situation is completely different in and of itself. Maybe it's not a simple go fetch quest, maybe it's something else. The GM Oracle is very useful as sort of an external tool that's built to answer questions, particularly not how you might default to answering that question. And by doing that, it helps you sort of create new ideas you might otherwise not come up with, and help keep your sort of adventures fresh as a Dungeon Master. Kind of keep you from, like I said, kind of having maybe, half a dozen to a dozen types of adventures that you normally run, and now have this tool that's like, yeah, but you can't do it like this, and then throws all these modifiers and monkey wrenches sort of into the system, so every time it's different enough that you enjoy it as a Dungeon Master, and your players are not going to be like, oh, we've done this adventure 3 times before, we know what to do here. Try to keep it fresh, try to keep it different, try to keep it engaging and interesting for yourself as the person who's running the game, and obviously your players who are playing the game. Alright, so how do you actually sort of incorporate the GM Oracle sort of into your DM tool set? So the GM oracles come in like a ton of different forms, and they kind of come with varying complexity to suit your sort of specific taste for how you are. Oh, I have a truncated version of my own sort of custom 1d20 GM oracle in my DM binder. It's right here. It's right on the first freaking page. This is this is sort of GM oracle light. It never fills you up, never lets you down. All the flavor of a, full calorie GM oracle, just in its light version. Perfect for everybody. Give it a try today. If you want to see more about the GM binder, I have a video of that on the channel, so check that out. This is the full 1d20 GM oracle that I use. This is what I use for my Solo RPG series, so if you want to see it in use and see how that works, there's a whole playlist. So there's 5-ish pages here, right? I think kind of bumps down here. Just use a simple 1d20 oracle. Very simple. When it's 50-50, 11 plus is the answer is yes for a yes or no question. 10 or less, the answer is no. I have a +3 modifier. +3 or -3 if I think it's a likely or unlikely result. And then that goes up to a ± 5 if I think it's a very likely or unlikely result. So yeah, it's pretty simple. So if you roll a d20, if you roll a natural 20, you get yes. And an edge, this could be an edge or a hindrance depending on sort of how you frame the question, but I just left it in as edge. So it kind of gives you, there's D10 that you roll on for that, so the answer is yes plus some extra, or no plus some extra. Same thing with the natural 1. And then 12 through 19, answer is yes. Just a flat yes. It's one of the things that I changed. It's one of the reasons that I came up with my own specific version, is because there are a lot of other ones that have a lot more complicated results. I know personally, for me, when I played Dungeon World with its 2d6 system, one of the things that really bothered me about that system is that it's very rare that the answer is just yes or just no. Which I realized put me in a weird position as a player, because it was informing the way that I played the game. And the way that I was playing the game was that I only ever wanted to roll on things my character was good at, because there was a likelihood that I would succeed. But the problem is that the scale of how that 2d6 table works with Dungeon World, and anything that's powered by the apocalypse, is that most of the time, whenever you make a roll, something bad is going to happen to you. There's going to be some detriment to whatever you're rolling. Even if you succeed, it's usually you get success with something bad that happens to you, or puts you in more danger or something like that. And I felt like it put me in a position where I was like, I often didn't want to roll dice, or it often would come up to sort of my character's turn, and the game master wouldn't be, I can't remember what they call it in Dungeon World, look at me and be like, what do you want to do? And I was like, there are so many times that I just want to be like, I don't want to do anything, because everything's going to hurt me, and the one good thing my character could do doesn't really apply to this situation, and I feel like if I roll anything, it's just going to be detrimental to me or my companion, so I don't want to do anything. And I was like, that to me was like, that doesn't feel like a good resolution system if it makes me not want to engage with the resolution system. Well, and a lot of the Oracle tables work like that, where it's very rare that you just get a flat yes or a flat no. So I built my own table where it's like, I want more yeses or no. Sometimes I just want to know a yes or no question. And so I feel more comfortable using the GM Oracle roll when I'm like, this won't spill out into its own thing, when I'm just trying to answer a very simple yes or no question. Are there crates in this room for me to hide behind? The answer is no. And something terrible happens to you. How are these things related? So if you roll a natural 20 or a natural 1, you get the yes or no plus an edge or hindrance, depending on what makes sense for that result. 12 through 19 is yes. 2 through 9 is no. 10 is no plus some sort of interrupted scene. 11 is yes plus some sort of interrupted scene. So this is our yes, and things are about to get really weird. So these are the things, these 10 and 11 results are the things that I didn't like about things like systems like Dungeon World. These sometimes called narrative systems, where they're like, where it's like, we'll never give you just a yes or no answer. And I'm like, sometimes I really want, most of the time I want just a yes or no answer. I don't want things to become more complicated. I'm trying not to turn every scene into just a plate of spaghetti that I'm trying to unravel. I bumped this down, so there's only 10% chances there's going to be an interrupted scene with my system, with this little oracle that I built. They're very, very simple. It's just the interrupted scene is like, the answer is yes to this, but then something else interjects it. Somebody else, you know, in a very sort of stage play kind of way, somebody else walks on stage and something else happens that sort of interrupts what you're doing. So it's cool. It kind of adds that sort of randomness or getting interrupted in the middle of what could be a very important scene because you just happen to roll weirdly. So for edges and hindrances, I have a D10 table. It's very simple. Bring current plot thread to a climax. So that means you just find your current plot threads. You'll have a list of them. That's how it works. And you grab one and be like, or you roll for which one and be like, this one is coming to a head right now. What does that mean? Who knows? If it doesn't make sense, as with anything with a GM Oracle, if it doesn't make sense, then you don't use it. If you can't figure out how that happens, then don't worry about it. So that's one, is bring a current plot thread to an end, to a climax. The second is make a new plot thread, something 100 new that you learned from this sort of interaction or space. 3 is some existing faction or NPC enters or exits the scene. So if you have multiple that are already in there, they can leave the scene. Which might mean that they huff off, right? If it's a hindrance and you're having a tense negotiation, they might lose their cool and leave the room, and you're like, well, that's the end of the scene then. I guess I don't get to talk to them anymore. And maybe that's a hindrance for talking to them in the future. That's how the edges or hindrances kind of work. The same thing could go is like, if that was supposed to be an edge, something that was supposed to be beneficial for you with that same result, you could be like, well, their top advisor gets personally upset or gets drawn away to deal with a different issue, and now you have advantage of dealing with this person because now you kind of have a diplomatic power play kind of going on where you can kind of bully the table a little bit. So that might give you some advantage on some rolls in that sort of diplomatic sort of sense. Yeah, you can always ignore the words after the yes or no. Yeah, you don't ever have to follow them. There are plenty of times where I'll roll like a 10 or 11 right at the beginning of the session and be like, I don't want to do an interrupt scene. I'm in the very first scene. Or I just got done with an interrupt scene. Or I'm in an interrupt scene right now and I don't want to interrupt my interrupt scene. You have bring current plot thread to a climax, new plot thread, existing faction NPC enters or exits, a new faction or NPC enters. That means that somebody we haven't met before enters the scene. Some sort of revelation that alters the current plot thread, so we learn something new, some sort of secret information we didn't know about before that generally makes things worse, but could make things better. It can always be an edge, so that might make things better, but most of the time, usually that's worse. You can trade a resource to gain an edge or avoid a hindrance. So you come up with something that's very specific that you can trade some sort of resource, whether that's a spell slot that you have, they can do, you have some points of gear or something like that that you can use. Any of those classic abilities to do that stuff. Absolutely. NPC acts against their best interest. So you have, and that could be, that might be good for you. So let's say, here's an example from the recent solo game that I did where we had found that Dwarven Rye whiskey that was very good stuff. And Imbar went over there and decided to, they had a little tasting session of the Dwarven whiskey we found in the dungeon. If I had an NPC act against their best interest, if I had, for whatever reason, rolled an oracle roll about that and ended up with some sort of hindrance, it might be that, it could have been, I could interpret that as Imbar just gets hammered in the middle of this dungeon. Just doesn't know the proof of the alcohol and ends up drinking way too much, and now is absolutely just like a mess. Just a slob all over this dungeon. It's like, that would be very bad, and I don't want that. So, but that is one of the ways I could rule that, and I probably would, just because I'm a little bit of a masochist in that way, I guess. And 8, gain or lose a resource, very simple. You either find something here, or somebody gives you a gift, or something like that, or you lose a resource. I think that's one of the ways that we got, actually, Akari, Liaden's bow. I believe we actually rolled for that, and it was gain a resource, and he gifted us that bow as sort of his family heirloom bow, is sort of like a promise that we could call in a favor basically later, which we have. So thanks for that. So those are the edges or hindrances, and then I have down here at the bottom, it's like, hey, sorry, you can't see all the way at the bottom. Here we go, all the bottom. I literally have a thing. I'm just gonna cut places actually. It says, hey, you drawing a blank? Your next oracle roll is either at advantage or disadvantage instead. Like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this hindrance is. Next time I roll a GM oracle roll, I'm going to do it at disadvantage, so it's more likely to be a no. Or whatever is more likely to be detrimental to me. And then we have our 1d20 plot twists or reveals. This is one of the ones that I use for, like, when we have this, like, number 5, revelation that alters the current plot thread. So there's another little thing, or just random stuff we can find out about stuff. It's just a very, very, very simple table. Number 1, can't be resolved by fighting, whatever this issue is. Sorry, combat's out the window. We're gonna have to come up with some reason you can't use combat for this. 2, it's only part of a larger plot. Hey, what do you know? There's something else going on here. You're treating a symptom, not the problem. Some sort of thing where to save one, we must sacrifice one. So it's going to put us in a very sort of moral dilemma. NPC has a hidden identity. So there's somebody in here who is masquerading, who are not who they say they are. Patron and villain inversion. So the guy we're being told is the bad guy isn't actually the bad guy. And the person who we think is our patron, who is telling us to go fight the bad guy, is the actual bad guy. 6 requires personal sacrifice, so the PC or PCs are going to have to actually give something up for this. It's going to require something from them. A PC or NPC is integral to the plot, right? Same sort of thing would be like, hey, this actually has something to do specifically with you, PC. This is about you for some reason. Or specifically about this random NPC you know, that they are tied to this. You must protect an area or bystanders. Yeah, that you're trying to stop collateral damage as well. Kind of gives you some extra things to worry about, sort of like during a fight. Quid pro quo. When you little, scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of situation. So they're going to have to do a little bit of that in the adventure. They're going to have to schmooze with somebody and get them on their side. Or do a favor for them that they're probably not going to want to do. Make it something they're really not going to want to do. So they have to make a tough decision about it. Only doable by a specific who, when, where, or how. So there's a specific thing, like this is you gotta kill the vampire with a stake kind of thing. So fight the previous heroes, they're brainwash dominated or undead. That's always a fun one. I did that one for a one-shot not that long ago, where I was like, oh, now you have to fight the worm-infested undead heroes that were in here before. A rival, adventurer, patron, or villain. So now you've got a rivalry, somebody who's also trying to accomplish the same things your player characters are trying to accomplish. Enemy or rival has to be turned into a temporary ally. You secretly knew who the villain was the whole time. Very Scooby-Doo. Stripped of normal abilities gear. So they're prisoners, they've been polymorphed, they've been resized. We ran I played in a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of game once, which was fun. Number 16, NPC betrayal. The classic NPC betrayal. That's only going to happen 5% of the time that you roll on this table. What you don't want to do as a Dungeon Master or Game Master is overuse the NPC betrayal thing. Because then they won't trust anybody, and you need them to trust your NPCs most of the time. Same thing, party is set up as a patsy or scapegoat. For whatever the villain kind of sets them up to take the fall, kind of does like an entrapment and puts them in the wrong place at the wrong time, and with a bunch of evidence around them that makes them look guilty. Yep, do that. Unintentional success consequences. So there's some sort of unintended consequence from your success. We stopped the magma that was being flowed into the Dwergar's Undermountain Forge that was, helping them prepare to wage war on the surface world. We stopped that magma flow. We did it, guys. Oh no, the volcano's erupting because there's no place for that magma to go now. Crap. It's not the true source of the issue. Similarly, you walk into a place and you're like, oh, this will solve the problem. You go and do that thing, and that ends up not solving the problem. And then number 20 is a classic villain deputy switcheroo. So I like to run adventures where you have a villain who also has like a right hand man kind of guy, like a lieutenant, a deputy, and then do the switcheroo where it's actually like, the deputy was actually the one pulling the strings the whole time, just this oath that he let pretend be in charge. I want to talk a little bit about interrupted scenes. So interrupted scenes, you have a subject, you have an action, you have an object. These are all d20 rolls. It just got the tables right there. So the simple quest-o-matic, I talked about that earlier, about having this sheet that has the roll for like time to come up with an adventure. I don't know, something for the adventure, and this is one of those sources, is the quest-o-matic. And it basically fills in right here. The subject wants to action to object plus timer. There's a villain. Why do they want this? A patron. Why do they want this? And a reward. Why do the adventurers agree to go do this? Alright, so the first thing I might need is a subject. So let's say it's got down here PC, belief, creed, doctrine, creatures ordinary, creatures extraordinary. So if the creature's sort of like mundane, so that could be, you know, your average people and natural beasts and things like that. Or creatures extraordinary, which are monstrosities, dragons, extraplanar beings, fiends, and fae, and an existing faction, a new faction, a hazard or obstacle, which is ordinary, a hazard or obstacle that is extraordinary, info or technology that's ordinary, info or technology that's extraordinary. So that might be magic, some sort of magic item or things like that. There are things about magic or about powerful spells, weird magics, planar things, demon summoning things, anything that's weird, kind of, for the most part. Is this an ordinary thing that you come across like this? Is this a super mundane problem with super mundane people? Or is this a mundane problem with extraordinary people? Or an extraordinary situation that has to be dealt with by mundane people? Because those are all very different situations. So if I want a timer, I think you should always roll for a timer. So on 13 plus, there's no timer anyways. So most of the time, there's going to be a little bit of a timer. You need to complete it before X happens. You need to complete it in some sort of window, like while X is happening. It's like, oh, it can only happen under the blood moon, or whatever like that. So it kind of gives you a very specific time frame. Hold situation, so like you need to stop something from happening until... Right, you need to hold back the bad guys until reinforcements arrive, that sort of situation. You need to complete once X happens. You need to deal with this problem and hold this problem until I can do something that I can do, you know, XYZ, and then you're able to complete the mission. So it's kind of what came before, so it's kind of the whole plus actually doing it. You can work a plot twist or reveal into the premise. We've got our whole 1d20 of potential plot twists that we can work into there. And then 12, if I just happen to roll a 12 on a d20, is roll twice and combine. Again, most of the time that's just going to be just one thing, because it's likely that I'm going to roll a 13 or higher on one of those dies. Kind of gives them this idea that time is a factor in the adventure. One of the things that timers are really good for is they fight the 50-minute workday phenomenon. Adventurers show up, they use all their cool abilities, and immediately try to go to sleep after their first combat, usually. And let's do our patron reward. So this is just an idea of, you know, it's hard to come up with rewards for adventures. Sometimes it's not just like more gold, and then the players get the gold, and then they're like, great, I have a whole bunch of gold and nothing to spend it on, because in 5e we've set up the system where we can't buy magic items, and that's weird because you keep giving me gold, and I don't have anything to spend the gold on. Sometimes you want something that's not gold. So the first one is favor. The patron's like, I'm going to do a favor for you if you do this for me. The second is, I'm going to give you some sort of consumable item. Maybe I'm going to give you spell scrolls. Maybe I'm going to give you healing potions, alchemist fires, featherfall tokens. If this is the sort of thing, like this is a side quest in an overall larger adventure where they need featherfall tokens, and he's like, oh yeah, I got like a whole sack of featherfall tokens, you guys can have it, but you gotta help me with this thing first. And then there's mundane gear or supplies. Rather than paying you in coin, I'm gonna pay you with gear. It works very well at the low levels. Once you get into higher level play, this becomes a little bit more difficult. You can offer them crafting supplies though, which is something many will take. Trade goods, so if you've watched any of the Solo RPG, you have seen me give out so many trade goods as treasure. Some sort of magic item or component to create a magic item. That's a good one. Cash or promissory note. I like to do promissory notes a lot. I'll usually give like a bank note. Be like, hey, if you take this back to whatever bank in whatever city, I'll give you 50 gold. Cool. Is that worth a trip? But also, you can just like real paper money. It's like you can hold on to a lot of promissory notes for a lot of money and basically no weight. And there often can be vended good as cash, because in that way there's sort of like a American Express like traveler's checks where you can just show up and be like, hey, here's a check, give me money please. They hand you money for it. Same sort of thing. So you can kind of do those with promissory notes. They're going to do some sort of, the patron's going to provide some sort of service for you. An introduction to a person, a letter of introduction is a very powerful tool. Meet with people of higher society, which is usually how again, this table is built for me and my personal games. So I definitely have the thing where it's like, you guys start out at the bottom and you don't know anybody and you don't have any sort of like social or political sway in the least. So you do not have the ability to just like rock up and be like, hey Duke, you got any jobs for me? And they're the sort of things like, you're not not on the list, you're not gonna make it past the front door, guy. It's like, here, let me get you in touch with one of my more powerful friends. And then do it that way. Entrance to a place like they give you a membership to some exclusive area, someplace maybe you get to be able to use the college laboratory or something. Access things, places, and people. That's what these three are about. 11's a classic. Secrets or information. Always looking for secrets or information. Temporary boon or enhancement. They're like, hey, I'm gonna give you something that's gonna last for you for a little bit. That could be like a divine boon. It could be some sort of arcane thing. It could be like, hey, I'm going to let you borrow something. Or they just give you a permanent boon or enhancement. Same thing, going to give you some sort of training or proficiency. I agree to be your teacher for free and teach you, a specific proficiency with a skill or a tool. Property, lease, or ownership. Yeah, you do this thing as like, you know what? You own this tavern now. That's a great way to sort of like get players into the downtime mechanics. Be like, hey, now you also have to take care of this thing, which is going to be a money generator for you. You can be rewarded with a title or office, right? You get a little bit like, hey, great work. You're the bailiff now. Number 17, proven ready for the real task now. The first adventure is just making sure that you're up to the real task. So your reward for good work is more work. Some sort of license or liberty is one of the things that came up in a game that a few of my friends and I, when our normal campaign isn't playing, we're playing sort of like a GM list, very sort of like solo TTRPG, but with all of us, so we're using this exact same system. And we rolled for one of the things that we were going to get was license or liberty, and we're like, okay, one of the things that we're going to get as a reward for this action is we're actually going to get the adventurer's license, so we can actually wear armor and carry our weapons in the city. Because other than that, we weren't able to do that. We had to keep our weapons piece knotted, we couldn't wear our armor. I really enjoy number 19. Number 19 is a thank you and you're always welcome in my home. You get a hearty handshake. Thanks for saving my family. Here's a handshake. You're welcome to stay here, but I have nothing to give you. And then number 20 is some sort of forgiveness of debt or transgression. Adventurers do a lot of stuff that are legally and morally gray. Let's say. So, sometimes just the forgiveness of a debt or some sort of, maybe not super nice thing they did, maybe some sort of slightly illegal thing they did, getting forgiveness from that, whatever the powers may be in that area, can actually be a very nice reward for the player characters. So you have a subject, an action, or an object, so the actions are aid or help, betray or misbehave, bribe, buy, or recruit, change or transform, create, release, or use, defend against destroy or slay, find, reveal, or seek, escape or flee, gain faith, morale, or trust, hamper or hinder, hide, obfuscate, or secret away, lose faith, morale, or trust, prevent, create, release, or use, protect against steal or take, chase or pursue, questions or changes mind, resists or survives, steal or take. So yeah, it just kind of gives me basic action. So if you take that subject and action and object and kind of toss them together. That gives you a good interrupted scene, and you can also use these with the simple sort of quest-o-matic, which is the subject wants to do an action to an object, and then you're like, is there a timer with it? And then you kind of fill out the little last little bits to be like, okay, who's the villain in this situation, if anybody? Why do they want this to happen? Who's the patron in this situation? Why do they want what they're asking you to do? You talk about sort of the patron rewards, and why do you as the adventurers agree to go do this thing? Because they're going to offer you that you're proven ready for the real task. Or maybe the patron's very vague about, like, they're very cagey about, like, oh, the reward will definitely be worth it. And they're very cagey about what you're going to get out of it, and you're like, I don't know if I trust this guy, but I mean, like, we need work, so I guess. And then you get back and it's like, oh, you've proven yourselves worthy. Now, I want you to take on the real challenge. And then down here, just for the extra things, so instead of using this guy, which was the sort of prompt table, I have a descriptor table. It's useful for when people ask me like random questions about stuff, and I'm like, I find it useful for naming things too. I had to come up with a name for a dance hall in that sort of side game that I'm playing, GM-less game. So it's like, oh, well, I need this dance hall because that's where our bard character is going to be. So there's a music venue because there's a bard in town, so that makes sense. And so I was like, I don't know what to call this thing. So I rolled randomly and I ended up getting color or pattern. So it's just called Paisley Hall, which sounds good to me. Like, that sounds like a real place to me. Put that into a Google search and it would probably bring up a location. A D66 descriptor table. If you don't know how to roll a D66, I don't blame you. It's not necessarily easy to know. It's 2d6. But you roll them the same way that you roll like percentile dice with 2d10s. A table of 36, which is no other way to do that table, really. I use this table especially when I'm naming things, where I'm like, I need to name a hill. Let me grab some dice. Let me grab 2d6. This hill is named 2-6. Material. Okay, so some sort of material. So it could just be named Iron Hill. That's the material it's made out of. Could be Silk Hill. Could be just out of any sort of material that you want to make it out of. So it could be metal. It could be, probably not plastic if we're doing a fantasy game. Adamantine Hill. They're descriptors, so you can use them. You can throw them on anything. I'll say roll twice, and I'll give those as descriptors for a new NPC. So 61. Map direction. Relative proximity. Okay, that's an interesting one. And 41. They are polite or vulgar. Exceptionally polite, but you notice that after you talk with them for a little bit, and maybe you're moving with them, like you're walking and talking, you realize that they always orient themselves so their shadow is also facing you. It seems to be like this weird quirk they do. So the sun feels like it's almost always at their back when you're interacting with them. And, that might be enough for be like, that is a super weird NPC behavior. What is wrong with this person? And, if you're running a random game, you'd be like, I don't know. You're going to investigate that? How are you going to investigate that? Maybe they're just weird. Maybe they just have some sort of weird tick. I'm running a dungeon, they're like, oh, well, you said there was a big sort of fresco on the wall. What's the fresco about? I don't know. Why did you ask me that? It's not important. It was just dressing. 42. It's something about honesty or dishonesty. And 46. Odor. It's sage advice about he who smelt it must have dealt it. Appears to be a fresco that's about flatulence. I don't know why that's important. You tell me why that's important. You're the one who's looking at the painting that doesn't matter to anything. There's a fresco on the walls that have like rules or etiquette for the bathhouse. And you're like, yeah, so it's about etiquette in the bathhouse, so it's about flatulence. Yeah, unless we can turn it into an easy hook. It's always nice to be able to like turn it into something that's useful for whatever you're doing, but sometimes it's okay to just kind of be silly. Be like, yeah, it's a fresco about farting in the bath and how you're not supposed to do it. Organizing for play. Tracking the important elements in play will make things flow. Below are the numbered for randomizing. Lists recommended. Plots or story tracks. PCs. And anybody who's in the adventuring party, really. Like I said, if you have sidekicks and stuff like that, they should probably be in there too. Factions and groups, and their, as a sublist, sort of like their specific NPCs, as you learn about them. places and locations in the world. As well, you may want to nest NPCs up there. NPCs rarely should be just hanging out by themselves in that list, so they should be nested under either a location or a faction or group. Sometimes both. And then VIP items, resources, MacGuffins, those sort of like important pieces of plot ephemera you need to keep track of, or backstory elements, stuff that you want to keep track of. If you've decided for the characters to roll those D100 trinkets tables, maybe you want to put their specific weird trinkets, mysterious trinkets under there. As you play, update these lists with new developments and remove outdated items as you close the related plots and story tracks. Due to the frequency of list changes, it's encouraged to manage lists in digital form. Can be used alone to run a solo or GM-less TTRPG session, or combined with your preferred TTRPG system to incorporate non-system specific elements. Which is a fancy way of saying that you could just run an entire self-made game with the Oracle. You don't actually need any other system, because it's going to answer any yes-no questions that you want for it, of anything that you try. So you can't run it just by itself if you want to do like a real free-form kind of thing. But if you're trying to test out a system or you just really love playing D&D or whatever, you can just layer the system on top of that. Try to use the specific system to do any sort of resolution mechanics that you can, and only use the GM Oracle when you have to, kind of. So instead of being like, one of the examples I give is that, we'll take the crate example that I did at the very beginning, where it's like, I walked into a room. Are there any crates in here that I can hide behind? Rather than just saying yes or no, I said yes or no because it was clear that you would be able to know at a glance whether there are crates or not in the room. But if you were like, oh, is there actually a specific place I can hide? Well, that's actually a stealth check that you're making, so you need to make a stealth check. So if you make a stealth check and it's a good stealth check, and then I'm like, well, now I actually need to see if there is a place for you to hide. You're competent enough in the hiding to know that you could hide if there was a place. But there might not be a place that you can really kind of like break line of sight from people who might be in the room. So that's sort of the thing, is that you want to use as much of the system itself as you can. Simply ask a yes or no question and roll the die to determine the answer. The 1d20 GM Oracle roll can be modified where one outcome is more likely than another. That's our plus or minus 3 and plus and minus 5. Edges and hindrances alter the current scene by creating a minor advantage or disadvantage. Roll on the following 1d20 edge hindrance alteration table to determine the addition's nature. Alternatively, when an edge or hindrance wouldn't make sense, or you want to keep play fast and easy, apply a common mechanical bonus or penalty, 5e's advantage, disadvantage mechanic, to the next core mechanic roll. Attack, check, save, whatever. You're like, I don't know what this is, but you get advantage on the next persuasion check you make in this, because I don't know how to interpret it, but you've gleaned some sort of insight into their personality, and now you feel a little bit more confident about how to communicate with them. Subject and object and 1d20 action tables. Use those as needed. The tables can be used in conjunction with your prepared list to randomly determine specific types of subject or object. Using GM Fiat to choose a scene interrupt is perfectly acceptable if you're stuck with sudden inspiration for interrupting the scene. Yeah. Basically, always use a good idea if you have a good idea. And then if you don't have a good idea, roll on the chart. If that still doesn't give you a good idea, you can either roll on the chart again or just move on. And it's perfectly fine to be like, I don't know what this is, and I don't want to waste any more time on it, so we're just going to move on, and I'm going to think about something else. I'm going to talk about published GM Oracles to check out. The big granddaddy of them all is the Mythic GM Emulator. That's probably the best known and one of the most robust. I think it's a good starting point because it's going to give you all the bells and whistles, and I think it will be helpful for a lot of people to realize when you're testing out the systems how much of everything you need, because I feel like Mythic GM Emulator is a very sort of kitchen sink approach. It kind of has everything in it. So that's one of the things I came into, and I used it for a little bit. Then I was like, this kind of has more stuff in it, but I'm not using a lot of the stuff. So I'm going to carve out a little piece that I like, do this, and realize that this is the sort of stuff that I don't find useful, so I don't want this in my custom system, and then kind of cobble together my system. Using that as sort of a very natural starting place. But it's also a really great one, and like I said, you can use that one and not run any other system with it. If you just want to do a light and free solo RPG experience, you can try that out. Second version of it's out now, which I've only messed with a little bit. I do like some of the changes for how to set up the list and stuff, though. I do like those those changes, and those are things that I need to implement sort of into my system, because I like those options a lot better. I think those are a lot stronger. Probably big and chewy system to kind of get a handle on if you're looking for something is the Solo Adventurers Toolbox. You can get that on Drive-Thru RPG, I'm pretty sure, as well as in a number of other places. And they have like the big one, and I think there's 2 versions of it now. There's 1 and 2, and you can use them together or separately, I believe. And then they have like some supplementary things that are kind of like, here's one for dungeon crawling, here's one for I think hex crawling or doing cities, and I think they have a lot of more like specific themed ones too, if you're looking for something like that. And then the third that I would probably recommend is Scarlet Heroes. Scarlet Heroes is a full TTRPG system. It has a baked-in interesting setting that's kind of like this Bronze Age collapse kind of sort of situation. It's very cool world, and that comes from Kevin Crawford, and anybody who's watched the channel knows that I am a fan of Kevin Crawford's, and I do like his other noted works, Worlds Without Number, Stars Without Number, both which are massively useful books if you want to run sci-fi games or fantasy games. So it's kind of built specifically for what Scarlet Heroes does, but it is an interesting thing, and the system is baked in, has a baked-in solo TTRPG engine for it. You could just pick it up, and it's its own rule set with the idea built into the rule set that you can run this by yourself if you want to, which is very cool. What to avoid with GM oracles, just like any random table or ChatGPT or any sort of written adventure modules, the tools are they're meant to help you. They're aids for you as the DM, and not to force you under like the thumb of those tools, whether that's an adventure module or stuff. Like, you are still the one who's piloting the ship, so you get to make the yes/no decisions. You don't have to be beholden to anything that those things put out. Any good idea should always trump random things. You have that strike of lightning and you have a good idea pop up in your brain, like, just use it. Just like throw it in right now, rather than wait or like confirm it with a die roll. We lose so many cool ideas because we don't use them when we come up with them. So as soon as you get them, like, just go ahead and use them as fast as you can. Even if it makes your perfect game a slightly less cohesive, you're still probably gonna be happier that you used the good idea rather than sat on it and put it in a drawer for a rainy day that may never come. Yeah, feel free to dump or augment the results as they make sense. You can always just go with your gut or re-roll if you start having to do like mental gymnastics in real game time trying to make weird things work. If it's not quick, if it's not super easy, then I just need to re-roll or choose something else, or just pass by this moment and be like, you know what, nothing, I don't know what would happen, so nothing happens. And that's okay to do. I think that's pretty much it. Have you guys used GM oracles before? And like, to what extent? Like, have you used it for a solo TTRPG element, or have you used it for sort of like aided to help you run the game, or maybe, like I said, maybe help with some prep kind of stuff? Because I definitely use it probably more for prep than I do in actual games, I feel like, most of the time. If you liked it, of course, like the content. Thank you guys for hanging out with me, as always, and let me sort of dump some of this GM Oracle stuff onto you guys, because I knew this one has been in the pipe for a while, and I really wanted to get around to it, but I was able to get around to it, and we got it done, and everything's great. If you're not subscribed, think about subscribing. Most importantly, if you know somebody who would also enjoy it, share it on social media, on Reddit, on your preferred RPG forum, whether that's Ian World or D&D Beyond, or wherever it is you get in the comments and do your edition wars. Just go ahead and drop this in there too to let people know. Get this in front of other people and not just have to worry about YouTube being able to sort of give it out to people. So any other external source is very helpful. Other things, we have Drive-Thru RPG store, everything's in it, pay what you want. You can check that out. You can check out redraggedfiend.com if you want to look at more blog stuff. I've written a lot of blogs over the years, so if you're looking for more of this sort of advice, you can always check that out. If you want to help support me, you can give me some $roonies if you have some of those over on Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/redraggedfiend. Try to do this every week, and I'll talk to you guys later, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye.